Hello, everybody. Welcome to our first podcast of the term. This is Chapter 1 from the Amerman text, An Introduction to Anatomy and Physiology. And we're going to be dealing with the overview of this discipline. And this will essentially provide an introduction to the types of study techniques that you're going to use in order to be successful at this course, as well as the structure and function of all the different body systems. So, one of the things that we want to do right off the bat is address what it is we're dealing with, which is the functioning of a living organism. Now, what does it mean when we say that something is living? Okay, they share a certain set of distinct properties. All living things are made of cells. This is essentially going back to the cell theory of Schleiden and Schwann. The cell theory is relatively simple. It states that all living things are made of cells and that all cells come from pre-existing cells. And this was something that was spurred on by the early research of Leeuwenhoek, who invented the first primitive microscope, and after observing living material, noted that everything he looked at under his new instrument had a cellular structure if it was from living tissue. And Schleiden and Schwann were the first to observe mitosis and cytokinesis, and they hypothesized that all cellular material comes from pre-existing cellular material, with, of course, the exception of the first ever living cell, and we really don't know where that came from. So you could think of the cell as the smallest unit of living matter, okay, and that's kind of important. So why don't we make a note of that while we're here, and we'll do that in red, right? So we'll say that the cell is the smallest unit of living matter. It can carry out all the functions we associate with life. All living organisms are composed of cells. Metabolism is another critical aspect that all living things carry out, and that's the ability, essentially, to extract energy from fuel molecules that it consumes, and also to generate waste products as a result of the process. Living organisms carry out a number of chemical reactions known as metabolism, that can either build up or break down substances depending on the organism's needs. The anabolic processes are the building up processes, and the catabolic processes are the processes that we use to break down components. So let's make a note of that while we're here. So building up is anabolic. And breaking down is catabolic. And one of the things we're going to find out in the chapter on chemistry is that anabolic reactions, which assemble big things from small things, require the energy from catabolic processes in order to drive those chemical reactions. Growth is where the building of molecules outweighs the breaking down of molecules, and it comes in two forms: an increase in the size of individual cells and an increase in the number of cells. Excretion is a process that an organism uses to eliminate harmful waste products that are created by metabolic processes, and this is critically important because if we don't have excretion and removal of these waste products, we potentially create a toxic environment around the organism that can end up killing the cell, the tissue, the organ system, and the organism. It also is capable of responding to stimuli. This is the ability of organisms to sense and react to changes or stimuli in their environment. If we were unable to do this, we wouldn't be able to get out of danger, we wouldn't be able to find food and shelter, and so on. Probably the most primitive example of this kind of response is seen in single-celled organisms, where we observe the ability to move towards or away from certain components as positive and negative chemotaxis. And essentially what we mean by that, when we talk about positive chemotaxis, the organism will move towards a particular compound that will benefit it and away from a compound or an environment that would be harmful, and as a result will live long enough to reproduce. Movement is the ability of an entire organism to move, or movement of individual cells or materials within or between the cells of an organism. And all organisms display some form of movement if they're alive. Even something that seems stationary like a plant does undergo movement at the cellular level. You can see cytoplasmic streaming. You can see plants with leaves reposition their leaves in order to capture the rays of the sun. And of course, we note movement in both animal species, fungal species, bacteria, and so on. Reproduction takes the form of either individual cells reproducing within an organism, and that's to replace damaged or old cells. This process is known as mitosis in the human system and in eukaryotic systems. The organism itself can reproduce to yield similar offspring, and we are sexually reproducing organisms, which means that the male and the female generate specialized sex cells that are called gametes. The male gamete is called the sperm, and the female gamete is called the egg, and they fuse in a process known as fertilization to generate the first diploid zygote of a new organism. Once that occurs, that cell will rapidly divide to produce the tissues, the organs, the organ systems, and the organism over the 9 months of human development, if we're looking at the human system. And the advantage of sexually reproducing species is that the characteristics that are carried in the genetic material, which provide the biological basis for our traits, come from both the mother and the father, so that the offspring is not an exact copy of either of the parents. And in addition to that, the genetic material in the sperm and the egg are reshuffled in a specialized form of cell division known as meiosis, so that we generate unique combinations of genes on a single chromosome that don't exist in either parent, and further increase the genetic diversity of sexually reproducing species. And the reason that that's important is because for a population with differences in characteristics spread across all of its organisms, if they come upon a set of conditions which might kill or sicken certain members of the group, the likelihood that the entire group will be wiped out is much less. Some individuals within that population will survive because they have characteristics that will allow them to live long enough to reproduce, and those characteristics will be passed on to their offspring. Their offspring, as a result, will have a better chance of surviving in that particular environment, and that's a process known as natural selection. Okay, and we see it every day. The body is constructed from a series of progressively larger building blocks. Each type of block is known as a structural level of organization. At the chemical level, what we have are atoms that can combine to form molecules by generating chemical bonds that connect them to each other. These molecules can combine to form even larger molecules called macromolecules. The atoms, remember, are the smallest units of matter. They're anything that occupies space and has mass. And there are surprisingly few different flavors of atoms that make up all the matter in the universe. In fact, you can display all of those elements on a single page in a representation known as the periodic table, which we'll get to in the chapter on chemistry. But it's the combination of these atoms in different molecules connected to each other in different ways that generate compounds that are capable of performing different kind of roles in living systems. At the cellular level, what we have are collections of macromolecules that are arranged in such a way that we generate the smallest unit of living matter. The cell is formed by groups of different types of molecules combined in specific ways to form cellular structures. We'll find out as we explore the cell in the chapter on cell biology that there are specialized chambers inside the living cell called organelles where certain processes happen in a very efficient fashion, and processes that would interfere with each other as a result of being partitioned in these little chambers do not work at cross purposes. And so this aids in the efficiency of the cell and also in the adaptability of the cell, as we'll see in addition. The tissue level is two or more cell types cooperating to perform a common function. They consist of two components, the cells and their surrounding environment, which is called the extracellular matrix. They can vary from membrane sheets that cover body cavities to irregularly shaped cartilage found in the nose. So there's a wide variety of different tissues. Okay, tissue at its most basic definition is a group of cells with similar characteristics that are connected to each other that can do something as a team that a single cell could not do on its own. Okay? And then as we move up one level from that, we have the organ level, which are different tissues acting as a team to do something that a single tissue alone could not. So two or more tissue types combine to form an organ that has a recognizable shape and performs a particular task. The organ system level is made up of the body's organs that perform a task that an individual organ couldn't do on its own. For instance, the digestive system, the circulatory system, the nervous system, and so on. So two or more organs function together to carry out broad functions in the body that maintain survival. The cardiovascular system, which is made up of the heart, the blood vessels, and the blood that they pump, is important because it provides nutrients and oxygen to the tissues in the body and removes waste products such as ammonia and urea and carbon dioxide. It also maintains a constant electrolyte concentration in the body, a constant fluid level, and it maintains body temperature and acts as a transport mechanism for cells that defend us against disease. So it's critically important. The digestive system, another example, ingests food and absorbs nutrients and eliminates waste. And you can see here a diagram of the digestive system in miniature. It's made up of the oral cavity, the pharynx, the esophagus and stomach, the large and small intestine, and the accessory organs such as the gallbladder, the liver, the pancreas, and the salivary glands. And what's the job of the digestive system? It's to mechanically and chemically break down the food that we eat so that we can produce molecules that are small enough to be absorbed into the bloodstream across the lining of primarily the small intestine, and then the blood transports those nutrients to the tissues in the body that need it in order to survive. And then the component of our diet that we can't mechanically and chemically digest passes through the large intestine and is eliminated by the act of defecation via the rectum and the anus. The organism level is essentially all the organ systems working together to make the entire functioning animal, okay, in this case human. And these are the levels of organization, right? The chemical level, and I would say, we go here from atoms to molecules to macromolecules at the chemical level. The cellular level, where macromolecules are assembled in an organized fashion to produce the smallest unit of living matter, the cell, and then the tissue level, which are cells with similar characteristics acting together to do something that a single cell cannot. At the organ level, we have different tissues acting as teams to do something that a single tissue could not. And at the organ system level, we have a variety of organs acting together to do something a single organ couldn't, and of course all the organ systems acting together make the organism. And one of the things we're going to find out is that when we look at the organ systems, they're dependent on each other to maintain life. If one organ system fails, the other organ systems are bound to follow. And it's unfortunate, but it's a fact. The reason is that they're all intimately interconnected. If you can't have one function shut down without having a domino effect on all the other functions. So the body's organs are grouped into these organ systems, which consists of 2 or more organs carrying out a broad function for the body. There are 11 total organ systems. The organ systems work together to ensure the survival of the organism as a whole. The organ systems function together to make up the complete organism, which is the human body. So we begin with the integumentary system. This is the body's outer covering. It protects the body from the external environment. It's a synthesis location for vitamin D, which is important in the mineralization of bone. It retains water. It regulates body temperature. It's also a sensory organ. Okay? It acts to tell us about the world outside our body. Sensations on the skin include things like temperature, touch, vibration, pain, itch, etc. Okay? All of that information gets eventually piped into the nervous system and then up to the brainstem and the brain, where we decide what's happening to us, and then ultimately we generate a plan of action to act on those stimuli. Okay? So very important. Without our skin, we'd have a hard time with all of these functions, right? We would tend to dehydrate, our body temperature would fluctuate wildly, we'd have massive infection, all kinds of problems if we didn't have our outer covering protecting us from the outside world. The skeletal system supports the body and protects the internal organs. It also provides leverage for movement at special places called joints. It produces blood cells in the red marrow of the skeletal system, which is primarily in the flat bones. Examples include things like the coxal bones, the bones of the hip, the ribs, the flat bones of the skull, the proximal heads of the femur and the humerus, and the scapula and clavicle. That's where we make blood. And it also is a mineral storehouse. Among some of the minerals stored in the skeleton include things like phosphorus and calcium and other rare minerals, and so we tap into the skeletal system when we need these components for other bodily functions. And we'll find out as we talk more about the different body systems that the mineral components that the skeleton stores are important not just to give structural support to the skeletal system, but also to facilitate other processes that are necessary for our survival, such as muscle contraction, nerve transmission, blood clotting, and so on. The muscular system produces movement. It controls body openings, which are known as sphincters, or other examples of body openings, such as the mouth, the eyes, etc. It also generates heat when you shiver. It also maintains posture. And it also provides some protection for the internal organs as well. The nervous system is the body's electrical communication network. It sends and receives electrical signals, provides for sensation, movement, autonomic function, which is essentially the body operating without us consciously controlling it, and higher mental functions through nerve impulses. It also maintains the body's sense of balance, known as homeostasis, and this is important, homeostasis, because it's the body's effort to try and maintain a stable internal environment in the face of internal and external environmental change. And if we didn't do that, the tissues, the cells, the organ systems, the organs wouldn't be able to function properly. Here we have the endocrine system. The endocrine system acts along with the nervous system to maintain homeostasis, and it does so by producing chemicals called hormones, which are secreted into the bloodstream and carried around the body by the beating action of the heart. And when they arrive at target tissues, they bind to receptors on those target tissues and induce changes in those tissues that create conditions that eventually feed back to the original endocrine organ and turn off that chemical command. The reason that it evolved as an adjunct to the nervous system is because the nervous system is quite extensive, requires a lot of energy, and it would be logistically difficult to hook every cell in the body directly up to the nervous system. It wouldn't provide for a good architecture for the body. And so this is the snail mail to the nervous system's email to maintain homeostasis. Cardiovascular system is important because it delivers oxygen and fuel to cells and tissues that need it in order to generate energy to survive. It also removes waste products from these tissues so we don't create a toxic condition around these tissues and cells that causes them to die. And it's a transport medium for, in addition to waste products, nutrients, oxygen, and CO2, it also carries chemical signals around the body, such as hormones, so that we can coordinate internal function. And it provides a method for our defenses, our body's defenses, to move from point A to point B in order to protect us from disease. The lymphatic system returns excess tissue fluid to the cardiovascular system after filtering it for the presence of pathogens, which are organisms that cause disease, and it also provides immunity, which is protection against disease as a result of assault by either living or non-living pathogens. A pathogen is simply a term for a disease-producing entity. Examples of living pathogens include things like bacteria, fungus, parasites. Non-living pathogens include things like toxins and viruses. The respiratory system delivers oxygen to the blood and removes carbon dioxide from the body and maintains the acid-base balance of the blood. Why is this important? Well, the cells need oxygen in order to make a lot of energy that allows them to continue life processes. If we don't have oxygen around, we can't make enough chemical energy for the cells to sustain life. With oxygen, we can produce more than enough energy provided we have fuel around in order for the cells to continue to grow and divide and perform their normal function in the body. Acid-base maintenance is important because if the body's tissues, extracellular environment, the fluids become too acidic or too basic, that creates a toxic condition that causes cells and tissues to die. Digestive system digests food both mechanically and chemically, absorbs the nutrients into the bloodstream, removes waste products so we don't create toxic conditions around the cells that kills them, and it also helps to regulate fluid, electrolyte, and acid-base balance. Okay? Essentially, we must eat to live, we must breathe to live, right? And what that does for us is that gets oxygen and fuel to the cells. The cells use the oxygen and fuel to make immediately available energy to live, and we also get rid of the waste products using these systems as well. The urinary system removes nitrogenous waste from the blood. It also regulates fluid, electrolyte, and acid-base balance, and it stimulates red blood cell production. So this is another waste removal system along with the digestive system and really the integumentary system to some degree. And we could also include the respiratory system as waste removal body systems. Again, we don't want waste products to build up in the body fluids and the body tissues because we'll create toxic conditions that will kill cells, that'll kill tissues, that'll shut down organs, and that'll turn off organ systems. The reproductive system comes in two flavors, right? Male and female. The male reproductive system produces and transports sperm and secretes hormones that regulate gamete production, basically the generation of new sperm cells, and also control secondary sex characteristics. And in the male, that includes things like axial and body hair, muscle mass, high hematocrit, high bone density, high metabolic rate, and also this helps to modulate our sex drive, known as our libido, okay, the desire to reproduce. Female reproductive system is the female counterpart to the male. It produces and transports eggs, but it's also the site of fetal development, nourishment, childbirth, and lactation. So it does a lot more than the male reproductive system. It secretes hormones, and it also maintains sexual function, right? So it controls the rate of gametogenesis. It controls female secondary sex characteristics such as body shape, the production of breast tissue, and also the maintenance of libido. The study of the human body can be approached in different ways. Systemic anatomy is used in this textbook and examines the human body by looking at individual organ systems, such as the nervous system, the lymphatic system, and so on. Regional anatomy divides the body into regions of study such as the head, the neck, the thoracic region, the abdominal pelvic region, and so on. Surface anatomy studies surface markings in the body, while gross anatomy examines structures that we can see with the naked eye. So here we don't need any assistance in order to look at things like the gross anatomy of bones, the gross anatomy of the digestive system. All of this stuff we can observe without any special instrumentation. With microscopic anatomy, we need a little help in the form of a microscope. We can study tissue organization and the shape and characteristics of the individual cells of the tissue. So when we study tissues themselves, we call that histology, and when we look at cell structure, we call that cytology. Now we can address different disciplines within anatomy and physiology. When we think about these two disciplines, they go hand in hand. Anatomy is the study of structure, while physiology is the study of function. And to an extent, it's an incomplete approach to studying the human body if we were to only learn the locations of the organs, the appearance of the tissues, and not understand their function. So physiology has within it subfields that are classified by organ or organ system. Examples include neurophysiology, where we study the brain and nerves, cardiovascular physiology, where we study the heart and blood vessels. Physiologists can also specialize in levels of organization other than systemic, which is whole body. Some study the body's chemical and cellular processes, while others study specific tissues or organs. But again, more to the point, it's combining function with structure that allows you a complete picture of a functioning organism. If we take the example of anatomy and physiology with regard, say, to an automobile, right? The anatomy of the automobile would be the location of the steering wheel, the doors, the quarter panels, the windshield, the engine block, and so on, which is all well and good. But you want to understand the function of each of these parts, and that generally flows from their structure. Okay, so when we talk about anatomy and physiology with regard to the human body, if we were to take, let's say, the nervous system, the location of the brainstem, and the spinal cord and the peripheral nerves is important to know, but we want to know what these structures do, right? And as we get into the nervous system a little bit later on this semester, what we're going to find out is that the brain, as a result of its structure, where we see lots of convolutions in the brain, ridges that are called gyri and grooves that are called sulci, performs a lot of neurochemical activity, right? It sends and receives electrical signals. It processes information that comes into it from the peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system, we're going to discover, takes physical stimuli and turns that into electrical information that can be piped up to the brainstem and the brain. And the brain's job is to assign a sensation, that is the awareness of what's happening, and then the perception of what's happening, which is attaching the meaning to the sensation. Is this sound, is this smell, is this sight, and so on. And then the brain integrates all that information and sends it to the frontal lobe, which is where we perform our planning and our problem solving. We generate now a plan of action to deal with those stimuli. We send that plan of action down the brain to the brainstem and to the spinal cord, and ultimately to the peripheral nerves, which will talk to target organs such as skeletal muscle, smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, other organ systems, and we'll have an appropriate response based on those commands, which were essentially an assessment of what those stimuli were. And all that falls out as a result of knowing the anatomy, but also knowing the histology and understanding, when we look at things like nerve cells, that they are designed to send and receive electrical information. And the other part of nervous tissue is glial tissue, which is designed to support and protect the nervous tissue, and also to allow the electrical signals to go from where they're produced to where their destination is. Okay, and that again comes from combining structure with function. So when we work our way through this course, always remember that the reason that that a particular organ or a tissue or a cell has the features that it has is because it has a particular job to do. Okay, and that's going to be one of the core principles that we'll touch